Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining. Thank you for taking the time to learn about this new feature that we've shipped recently. My name is Vishal, and today I'm going to be taking you through this new feature called the Orchestration Center. We launched this towards the end of last year. It is a pretty power-packed feature, and we believe that it's going to take your automations to the next level. Okay, so what are we going to cover today? We're going to cover quite a bit of ground today. We're going to try and keep this focused on the how, so that we can enable all of you on the call to get started with orchestration right after you attended this call. But we'll start off by sort of focusing on why we built this feature, right? So we'll quickly cover that, and then we'll jump into the actual feature and cover a bunch of use cases, and then take Q&A after that. Okay, so let's get right into it. So why did we build this? If you look at the slide, it really captures the nature of the IT service desk today, right? Or any enterprise service management tool for that matter. The service desk is really a hub for a number of requests that come in that require your service desk agents and technicians to take actions in a number of different third-party systems. And this is the length and breadth of those systems that they interact with. You've got identity management systems like Octa, Azure AD, where you need to create users, add users to groups, remove users from groups when people are off-boarded and onboarded, and so on. You've got different business applications, collaboration tools like Slack, MS Teams, where you need to pipe in messages, pipe in the necessary context about a certain ticket, about approvals. That needs to happen in Slack, MS Teams, Google Chat. You've got DocuSign, Zoom, a number of different business applications that agents would require to take actions in on a day-to-day basis, right? And then you also have another set of applications now available to support your cloud infrastructure, such as AWS, Google Cloud, Microsoft Azure. So if you do host your own applications, you would be required to take some of these actions and perform certain maintenance activities across these providers as well. So this is real. It is the landscape in which service desk agents and technicians operate in today. So what if we could automate the mundane, the repetitive actions that we take across each of these applications, right? That we see here. That is exactly what the Orchestration Center is built out to do. It is designed to automate all of these actions into these third-party systems without really writing a single piece of code, right? So it's going to be very easy to use, drag and drop using our visual workflow designer. And it's going to allow you to get started pretty quickly. Okay, so with that being said, I think we can jump straight into the walkthrough of the feature where we dive headfirst into a use case. The first use case that we're going to be covering is something that's related to taking actions in an identity management system. We're going to be using Octa as our identity management system of choice today. But before that, Ram, would you like to run that quick poll just to get a feel of the different kinds of systems our customers integrate with?
Yeah, sure. Okay. Perfect. I think Azure AD is the most common one, I think, followed by Active Directory.
Got it.
Perfect. Yeah, I think we can proceed.
All right. So obviously, it looks like all of you integrate with at least one of these identity access management tools of the market, the most prevalent one being Azure AD. So I'm going to be showing you Octa today, but do remember that the same principles that I'm showing you for Octa can easily be ported to Azure AD as well, to on-prem Active Directory, to G Suite, to OneLogin, and so on. We support all of these identity access management tools with the Orchestration Center today, right? So let me go ahead and show you what the use case consists of. It's going to be a very simple onboarding use case that we're going to demonstrate for you. This can be applied. The principles of this use case can be applied to offboarding use cases, to internal transfers, to ad hoc user provisioning requests that you may have. The principles remain the same across all of those use cases. So what happens in the simplest version of an onboarding flow, right? So you've got a new employee that's joining the organization. Let's say he's joining the finance department. HR would go in, create a service request to say that, we've got this new employee joining the finance department. You would fill in a form and submit that. A ticket gets created, which is then routed to the IT team. The IT team would then be required to go ahead and create that user, the new employee, within the company's identity management system of choice. In this case, we're going to be showing you Octa in the demo. And then once you created that user in Octa, you'd need to add him to the group based on the department he's joining. So since over here, we've taken a very simplistic logic saying that, there's a one-to-one mapping between the department and the group that user needs to be added to. So since that user is joining the finance department, we will go ahead and add that user to the finance group, right? So all of these actions, right? Creating that user, adding that user to a group, all of this that earlier was manually done by the IT agent can be fully automated from end to end without the agent having to intervene whatsoever, right? So fully automated service request without the agent having to intervene. So let's take a look at how we can achieve all of this. Okay, so the first thing that you'll see when you actually dive into the admin module within Freshservice is a list of features that we support, and over here you'll find the Orchestration Center, right? But before we dive into this, let me just go ahead and submit that form and show you what I mean. So let's say I have a employee joining. So Michael Steves is joining the finance department. He's joining as a manager. He's going to be a full-time employee and just going to fill out these details as well. So HR would come and fill out these details of that new employee and then go ahead and place that request. And once that request is submitted, orchestration is working in the background to go and create Michael as a user within Octa and add Michael, since he's joined the finance department, to the finance group within Octa. So the ticket has been updated almost instantly. And we've got a confirmation that we've successfully managed to add Michael Steves to the group finance. Now, if you go ahead to Octa and confirm this, so I've got a number of groups set up here. If you go into the finance group, we will hopefully see that Michael Steves has in fact been created as a user and added to the group finance, right? A very simple onboarding flow that has worked from end to end without the agent having to intervene. And it worked almost instantly, right? So how do we configure all this? Let me jump back to that admin page. So this is the admin section within Freshservice, a page that most of you will be familiar with. We have a new pill for the Orchestration Center. Once you click into that, what you'll see is the different components that make up the Orchestration Center, right? It's a number of things coming together to power this feature. But what catches your eye right off the bat are all of these different applications that you see here. We call these applications orchestration apps. They are a special category of apps, but what each app in this list does is it encapsulates each of the actions that you can take within each of these third-party systems. For example, we just fired an action in Octa, right? So that action to create that user in Octa and to add that user to a certain group will be encapsulated within the Octa app. If you want to upgrade a user from a basic license to a pro license in Zoom, that'll be encapsulated within the Zoom app. And all of it is abstracted away in a way that you don't have to write a single piece of code to perform these actions, right? If you want to create a channel and add users to certain channels and so on in Slack, that'll be encapsulated within the Slack app, right? And what makes them special? We call them orchestration apps. They are a special category of apps within the marketplace, within the Freshservice marketplace. What makes them special is that you can pull them into the ambit of the workflow automator that you've already configured, right? So if you have a configured workflow to fire for an onboarding request, you can pull in any of these apps within the ambit of that workflow automator and automate that service request from end to end, right? So you can leverage existing events, conditions, actions, and you can also leverage all of these actions that you can take across these different apps within the workflow automator, right? And I'll show you that when we look at the actual workflow configured for this use case. You will also have a report. You will be able to report on the different actions you take over a period of time using the orchestration metrics report that we have out of the box, and I'll show you that as well. But that pretty much sums up what we have within the Orchestration Center. We also launched something called the Orchestration Server recently. This is going to help you take actions across applications hosted on a private network, right? So Active Directory is one that pops out. It's prominently used. It's hosted usually behind a firewall. So the orchestration server is essentially an agent that sits on that private network, which then polls Freshservice for the actions that it needs to take over a period of time, right? So if you want to integrate with an on-prem application like Active Directory, you would need to install the orchestration server on that private network. So that's the big takeaway. But yeah, these are basically the components that make up the Orchestration Center. Let me show you how we've configured the workflow for that onboarding use case. So if you go into the workflow automator, I've configured a sample employer onboarding request for Octa. It is a fairly simple, straightforward flow. So what's happening here is that we have an initial event and a condition in place to ensure that this workflow fires only for a specific service item that's submitted by HR. Then what we're doing over here is we're ensuring that user doesn't already exist within Octa. So we're getting that user's details and then checking if that user already exists using a condition block. And if that user doesn't exist, then we can go ahead and create that user, right? And then we can then get the group details relevant to the department that user is joining. So all of this can be customized, right? So that's a big takeaway for you. Over here, we're doing it we're getting the group details based on the department that user is joining, but this can be tailored to your configurations and the way onboarding works in your organization, right? So it can be based on job title, it can be based on department, you can pull these in from a custom object, all of that's possible. So we're getting the group details relevant to that onboarded user's department, confirming whether we actually got a group for that particular department, and then going ahead and adding that user to the group, right? And once all of this is done, we have conditions in place to ensure that each of these actions are a success. And then once we've confirmed that last action is a success, we can go ahead and resolve that ticket and notify the relevant people. So what you're seeing here is the power of orchestration apps being pulled in into the ambit of the workflow automator, right? So you have all of these existing events, conditions, and actions that we already support. But what you're seeing also is actions that you can take in Octa. So anything that you see with the Octa logo on it is essentially configured using a new node called the app node. So if you click into more, you will see something called the app node, which you can drag and drop onto the canvas. And once you do that, you will be presented with a list of applications that you've installed. So at the moment, I've installed Azure, Octa, Zoom, and Slack, and DocuSign. But you'll also be presented with a list of apps that are available via orchestration. Right. So if I were to click on Octa, for example, I would then be presented with a list of actions that I can take in Octa. Right. So let's go ahead and configure one of these actions. So let's say get user with login. And then what you'll see is a blob of help text over here, which will help you configure this action. Right. It gives you a high-level description overview of that action, what it does, tells you what each of the inputs for that action are, and what the different outputs that you get back as a result of performing that action will be. So by getting a user's details with that login information, we're going to get the user's ID. We're going to get all of this information about his first name, last name, display name, email, and so on. Right. So and then we have something called a configuration. A configuration is essentially the name of the connection to Octa. So if you have multiple accounts of Octa that you want to connect to, you can set those up here and then determine which of those accounts you want to connect to. Let me just quickly show you that. So if I come into my apps that I've installed and I go into Octa, what I see is a list of configurations. So I see demo 1 and demo 2. What this captures is the authentication details that Octa requires to perform actions in a specific account of Octa. So this is pointing to one of our developer instances of Octa. So all of this information, how to get this information, will be detailed in a dedicated solution article with screenshots and so on. So it'll be pretty simple for you to configure this by following that article, right? So this is what you're seeing here. So you can configure multiple accounts of Octa that you want to connect to over here, and then simply reference them within the workflow over here using the configuration tab. Right, and where do you get the instructions to get all of that information, the installation parameters? You simply need to click on the app, click on the installation tab, and you can then click on the URL that should give you all the information that you need to set up the app. So you've got a detailed solution article for each app. We've also got solution articles dedicated to sample use cases. So the use case that you're looking at, that we're covering today, is also detailed out in a dedicated solution article. So you can reference all the articles post the call as well, right? And how we've configured these use cases. So that should help when you're getting started with orchestration as well. Okay.
Vishal, one of the questions on the chat is, can we expand on the conditions in the workflow to show how to specify conditions for the employee onboarding use case?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
we will definitely do that. So so we've covered most of it within the app notes. So we've covered the action, we've covered the help text that you can use to configure the action. We've covered what configurations are. And then what you'll see below that is the different inputs required for that action, right? So you can you can either hard code these or get them from your placeholder fields as well, right? So let's go ahead and configure one of these and see how it works. So let me hard code this to a user I know exists. We have a functionality to test an app action. We encourage you to use this to ascertain what kind of responses that you're going to get back for a particular input. So if I click on this, we should get back a response that indicates one certain meta properties that indicates that the action to get those users' details was indeed a success. So you have status code, system message returned from Octa, and so on. And you have all of those different output parameters that we talked about, such as first name, last name, that user ID, his email, and so on. Right. So all of these details can be used in subsequent conditions and actions, and that's what makes orchestration pretty powerful. Right. The response is available for you to use within your conditions and your subsequent actions as well. What does this look like for someone who doesn't exist, right? So let's take a quick look at that as well. So if I were to test this app action for someone that doesn't exist, you would see that the response generated is different. So it's a 404 error, which means that the resource was not found. And that's what it indicates in the system message as well. Now, what you can do with all of these system messages and these status codes and so on, you can latch on to each of these and then use them in subsequent conditions. And that's exactly what we're doing over here. So this initial check that we're doing to get a user's details and then to check if that user already exists is me simply latching on to the outputs of this action, right? So if we go into this action, what you'll see is I've configured it with the inputs coming in from the form. I've just simply concatenated the first name and last name, and then checking if that user already exists. So if michael.steves@domainname.com already exists, this gets resolved at runtime, obviously. And then once I've configured that app action, if I jump into this condition block, what you'll see here is I'm referencing the system message returned from this action. So A1 is a reference to this action. I'm referencing the system message returned from that action to check if it contains the phrase not found. So if you recall, when I tried querying Octa for a user that doesn't exist, it returned a system message that contained the phrase resource not found, right? So that's what I'm confirming over here. So how do you configure this? So when you click into your conditions, you will have access to your ticket fields, requester fields, and your request for fields. Along with that, you will also have access to all the meta properties and the outputs that you got as a result of performing this action. So you can use the ID, you can use the first name, last name, and you can also use meta properties like status code. So the same thing, the same condition could be configured in a slightly different way. You could say if the status code is 404, it would achieve the same result, right? So there are multiple ways of doing this. And that's the big takeaway. So it all depends on the way you want to configure your workflow. So we give you that a fair amount of flexibility to configure these conditions accordingly. Okay, so that's what we're doing over here. We're getting that user's details and then using a condition block to check if that user already exists. And if it doesn't exist, we can go ahead and create that user. So this action is fairly similar to the first action. We're simply mapping all of those parameters that we got from the form. In case you don't know how to get placeholders from a service request form, it's fairly simple. So you just click on the placeholder section. You go into the service request, search for the relevant service item. So in this case, it was the employee onboarding form. And then you will have access to all of your placeholders, your first name, last name, department, and so on. And then you can just map those out over here. Right, so if you have another point to note, and I'll share a link with you after the webinar, is if you don't have a very simplistic way of storing the emails, if it's not first name dot last name at domainname.com, if it's maybe the first character of the first name followed by the last name at the domainname.com, you can do all of that using something that we call liquid filters, right? And I'll give you a link to that once this webinar is over. So you can manipulate each of these placeholders to extract, a substring and so on, and then use them within these actions. So it makes it pretty powerful. Right, so this is how I've configured the create user action. I then have a condition in place to check whether this action failed. So it is a simple phrase check. If system message returned from this action does not contain success, then I can confirm that it failed. So once I confirm that it hasn't failed, you can go ahead and get the group details relevant to that user who's being onboarded. Like I said earlier, we're doing this based on the department that was entered on the form. So I entered the finance department, which is why I've mapped out that department field over here. So if I were to hard code finance here and test this app action, I would get the group details relevant to the finance department. So it's a success. and I get the group ID, when that group was created, the name of that group, and so on. Right, so that's what I'm doing over here. I'm getting the group details relevant to the department selected on the form, confirming that group was returned, and then going ahead and adding that user to a group. So this is an interesting action. What you'll notice over here is that we need two things, right, to add a user to a group. We need, number one, we need the ID of the user that we're adding to a certain group. And we also need the ID of the group that we're adding that user to. Right? So we need two inputs. One is the ID of the group and one is the user ID. So both of these are actually coming from our previous two app actions that we've taken. Right? So if you look at the user ID, it's coming from the action that we used to create that user. So how do we map these out? So we go into a placeholder section. You will have a separate section called app fields here, where you'll have a reference to all the previous app actions that you've taken. So e2.id references to this action. So if you expand that, you will then be able to click on the ID and reference that over here. Similarly, the group ID is referenced using the get group details actions that we took over here. And if you expand that, you'll be able to reference the group ID using this placeholder. Right. So this is one of the cool things that you can do with orchestration, in that every output of an app action is now referenceable as inputs to other actions. So workflows is a whole lot more context aware. And once that's done, I'm simply doing a 2xx check to ensure that that action was a success. Check whether that status code is between 200 and 300. And then once I've confirmed that, I'm going ahead and resolving that ticket. Right, so this is the first use case. I want to show you a couple of more things we have that come along with the Orchestration Center that's going to help you while you're designing these workflows. The first is execution logs. So let me just quickly show you that. Yep. So you can access these by going into the workflow automator and then clicking on the execution logs link. So this gives you a history of the different app actions that you've taken and their statuses over a period of time. Right. So we executed a number of onboarding requests. So this is the one that we just executed. The statuses of each of these actions, right, to get those user details, to create that user, to add that user to a group, the statuses can be threefold. It can be a success. It can be complete with errors. What does complete with errors means? In this case, we're trying to get a user's details, but that user doesn't exist. So the action is a success, and the request hit Octa, but Octa returns some errors. So which is those are what we label as complete with errors, right? So we try to get a user's details, but that user doesn't exist, or if we've entered some incorrect formatting for some of the inputs, all of that will be labeled as complete with errors. We also have failures, failed statuses as well. Those are down to the platform failing for whatever reason, due to the orchestration service and so on, right? So your statuses over here can be threefold. You can use global search. You can use filters to filter out each of these actions based on workflow, based on your ticket ID, and so on. So it becomes easier for you to debug your workflows when you're creating them. So that's something that's going to be very useful for you when you're creating these workflows and auditing them over time. Another thing that's going to be very useful is the reporting capabilities that we have on all of these actions as well. So if you jump into the analytics section, you will find a curated report called the orchestration metrics report that we've configured out of the box for you to use, where you can see the total actions that you've taken, how many of them were successful. You can see them grouped by application. You can see them grouped by workflow, by status, and so on. Right, so this comes out of the box. You can configure your own report as well, tailor to your own liking as well. So this is something that's going to be useful as well on an aggregate level. Okay, so we've covered quite a bit of ground. I can jump into the next use case pretty quickly. It is a collaboration use case. We're going to be using Slack and Zoom. But before that, Ram, do we have any other questions that we want to address, or do we take them after the second use case?
I think we can take that off the second use case. There is a question on the reader node. I think we can take it at the end of the second use case.
Okay, perfect. So let's jump into the second use case. All right, so this is the second use case. We're going to be using Slack and Zoom to automate the response to a major incident that comes into the service desk. Right, so we have an alert management module now. You can use event monitoring tools and pipe in those alerts, and then based on certain rules that you set up, you can convert those alerts into incidents. Right, so some of those incidents require immediate responses. It require a bunch of people to get into a room and collaborate through an issue. So what's going to happen in this use case is I'm going to simulate a creation of a critical / major incident. We're then going to pipe the information about that incident into Slack. So what we're going to do is orchestration is going to work to create a dedicated Slack channel on the fly. Right, it's going to create a Slack channel on the fly, add the relevant people to it. So you could add the requester of that incident. You could add a bunch of agents, designated agents that you have set up in a custom object. All of that's possible. So we're going to add a bunch of people relevant to collaborating through that issue into that Slack channel. And then we're also going to create an instant Zoom meeting and post that link, post the join URL for that Zoom meeting into that Slack channel. Right, so an incident gets created. We're going to create a Slack channel on the fly, add the relevant people to it, and post the instant Zoom meeting link into that same channel. Once this is done, the agents will hopefully proceed to collaborate through that issue, and then once they've come up with a resolution of that incident, they can go ahead and mark that incident as a resolved. And once you do that, orchestration then fires another workflow to go ahead and attach the conversation history that just took place within that Slack channel to that ticket. Right? So creating a Slack channel on the fly, adding the relevant people to collaborate through that issue with conferencing if necessary. And then once the incident is resolved, we're going to go ahead and attach the conversation history that took place within that Slack channel to the ticket as a note. Right, so that is the second use case. Let me go ahead and show you how this is done. Okay, so I'm going to simulate the creation of an incident. So it's going to use a simple VPN failure. Let me just go and save this incident. Okay, so my Slack, my Slack application is giving me a bunch of notifications, and there is an update to the ticket. Let me just go and refresh this. So the workflow has added a note saying that the Slack channel has been created and the relevant members have been notified of the issue. So if we jump into Slack, right, just remember that this ticket that we created is INC 68. So if we jump into Slack, we will see a new channel that's within that list of channels that I have called INC 68. And if you click into that, the first thing that we see is that the orchestration has managed to add a bunch of people, designated people, into that Slack channel, and it's also given me information, some high-level information about that ticket. right? And it's also giving me a Zoom meeting link as well. Right? It's giving me the subject of that ticket, the URL of the ticket, and it's also giving me an instant Zoom meeting link. So I'm going to pull in RAM to simulate a collaborative resolution of this ticket. So just bear with us for a minute. So hey RAM, it looks like VPN is down. Did we make any changes? Okay, it looks like there were some changes made and Balm has suggested a solution. Great. All right, thank you, Ram. Obviously, in reality, collaboration is not going to be this instant. It's going to go on for a lot longer. But we've just simulated a conversation to show you how the conversation history gets attached to that ticket. Right, so we've reached a resolution for that particular incident. Let me come back into my ticket and go ahead and mark this as resolved. Once I resolve this, I get a note attached to the ticket with a HTML file containing the conversation history of that ticket. So if I click into this, I see a HTML file that shows me everything that happened within that channel, right? So all that conversation between me and Ram is displayed over here. Right, so how do we achieve all of this? So along with the HTML file, we also give you the raw files as well, if you'd like to use them as well. But how did we achieve all of this? Right, so we've configured two workflows for this use case. Let me quickly show you those. The first workflow is firing to first go ahead and create that channel on the fly and add the relevant members to that channel, and then add the Zoom conferencing details as well. So this is that first workflow. It fires only when an incident is raised. We then confirm that this is a major incident. You can obviously customize all of these conditions according to the way it works in your organization. We then use the create channel action in Slack. Right? It is a private channel, so I'm going to set this as true. I want the name of the channel to match up with the ID of the ticket. So I'm using the ticket.id over here. And I'm using a liquid filter to convert that ID from an uppercase ID to a lowercase ID, because Slack accepts only lowercase naming conventions, right, for their channel names. So I'm converting that uppercase ticket ID to a lowercase ticket ID using the downcase liquid filter. Right, and we link some of those liquid filters that you can use post the webinar as well. Once we create the channel, we're then going ahead and storing the channel ID that of this channel that we just created against that ticket. So we have a custom field called Slack channel ID, and we're essentially using the output, the channel ID that we get as an output from this action to set that custom ticket field. Right, so you can set that Slack channel ID as a1.id. It's that simple. So we now have the Slack channel stored against that ticket. Then we can go ahead and add the relevant members to the channel. So we're using an action called add user to channel by email. So what you need for this action is the channel ID that we're getting again from this action, a1.id, and then a comma separated list of emails of the Slack users that need to be added to that channel. So in this case, I've gone ahead and hard coded these to add 3 members to the channel. In reality, all of this can be mapped out dynamically. You can add the agent, you can add the requester if necessary. If you have a lookup field, you can use the lookup field or email as well. You can read this from a custom object using the reader node. So all of that's possible. But for this particular demo, I've gone ahead and hard coded this. So we're adding that user to a channel, confirming that that's a success, and then we're creating an instant Zoom meeting. So what you see here is a number of applications coming together, right? So you're not limited to just one application action within the workflow. You can pull in Slack, you can pull in Zoom, you can pull in Azure AD if you want. So all of these can work together within the same workflow. We then, to create that meeting, we need the user ID. This is basically the host of that Zoom meeting. So you can just hard code that, shouldn't matter. So you just need to get the ID information of any user and then just pull that in over here. Give the meeting a topic, and then the meeting type again is 1, which indicates that it's an instant meeting. And then what you'll notice is one of the outputs of this action, if you scroll down, one of the outputs of this action that we're going to use is the join URL. So once I create this meeting, one of the outputs that I can use is the join URL, which you can distribute to participants who need to join that meeting. Right. So, and that's what we're going to be using here. So once I've created the meeting, I can then go ahead and post a message into Slack with the details of that ticket and the URL of that Zoom meeting as well. So what do we need to post a message into a Slack channel? We need, of course, the channel ID. Obviously that we're getting again from that first action we used to create that channel. And then we have information about the ticket. So we're mapping the ticket subject, ticket URL, and we're getting the Zoom meeting URL as well using this action, the output of this action. So that's what's happening here. Confirming that that's a success, and then going in and adding a note to confirm. So this is the first part of that use case. We've created a channel, we've added a bunch of users to that Slack channel. We've created an instant Zoom meeting and then added those meeting details via a message in Slack. Right. The second part of that use case is when we resolve that ticket, we go ahead and attach that conversation history against that channel. So this is that second workflow to attach the conversation history to the ticket. So the event here is when that incident moves from any status to resolved, and then confirm that it is a major incident or a business continuity incident. And then I use an action within Slack to attach the conversation history to a ticket note. So what you'll notice here is I'm using the channel is actually referenced based on the ticket, the custom field, which I used in my earlier workflow to store that Slack channel. Right, so we have, if you go to your ticket fields, you'll have a dedicated custom field for Slack channel ID that I created for this particular use case, and I'm using that, mapping that over here. Then the ticket ID and any notes that you want to add to the attachment, and an indication whether it's a public note or a private note. So that's how you accomplish that. You can, in addition to this, go ahead and archive the channel once you're done. So you can pull in the Slack app and then go ahead and archive the channel if necessary. So that's something that's also possible. Right, but that is the second use case in a nutshell. I know we've covered a lot of ground. Let me quickly recap all of this, and then we can open up to Q&A. All right, so quick recap. So we have the Orchestration Center. We have dedicated orchestration apps that encapsulate all of these different actions that you can take. And you can pull these apps and their actions within the ambit of the workflow automator. Right, so that's what you're seeing over here. Workflows are more powerful now in that the outputs of one action can be referenced as inputs to other actions. So our workflows are a lot more context aware. So that's something that's that you get with the Orchestration Center. We have the execution logs that you can use to debug and audit your automations over the period of time. These are extremely useful when you're designing the workflow and testing them out. And we also have a curated orchestration report that you can use out of the box. You can either use the one that's that's created for you out of the box, or you can use you can create your own reports tailored to your own liking. Right. So high level takeaways that you can report on all of these actions.